The ice on Frostreach Strait doesn't forgive anyone, not even a king. And that's the first thing I'd tell you if you asked why I was standing at the Judge's Rise that morning instead of on my throne, where my council thought I belonged. She'll be on her back before the second bell, Cade Thorne was saying, loud enough to carry, loud enough that he meant it to carry. He was pointing his blade at a woman kneeling at the practice line, lacing boots that had been resoled more times than they'd been replaced. Go on, Icelander. Show the hold how a servant skates. I knew her. Everyone at Frostreach knew Senna Wren, though most of them didn't look twice. She was the one who came out before dawn with her salt bag and her scraper, who kept the long ice smooth enough that men like Cade could race on it without breaking their necks on a rime ridge. She'd already worn her hands raw clearing. I'd noticed her longer than I would have admitted to anyone that morning. 2 winters, maybe 3. Long enough to know the particular rhythm of her work, out before the gulls, done before the hold woke, gone before anyone thought to thank her. I remember the first time I actually looked at her rather than past her. It had been a black morning in my second winter as Alpha, the kind where sleep wouldn't come, and I'd taken to walking the shore alone rather than pace the halls and wake my steward with my restlessness. I'd found her out on the ice at an hour when no one else was awake, working a long crack near the northern buoy with a chisel, and a patience I didn't have for anything in my own life just then. She hadn't seen me. I'd watched her for the better part of an hour, the way she read the ice with her hands flat against it before she ever touched the chisel to it, the way she seemed to be listening to something under the frost that the rest of us couldn't hear. I'd told myself it was simply skill, a trade learned well. I hadn't let myself wonder further than that, because a king does not go wondering about the woman who scrapes his racing ice, and I had a hold to run, and a council that reminded me daily of the kind of match they expected me to make. So when Cade Thorne dragged her name into his mockery that morning, some old, buried part of me went taut in a way I didn't examine closely. You don't have to do this, I said. I hadn't meant to be close enough for her to hear me, but the Judge's Rise put me near the practice line, and my voice carries whether I want it to or not. She looked up, gray eyes steady, unimpressed with kings. No, she agreed, I don't. And then she finished her lacing and stood. That should have been the end of it. A servant humoring a dare, skating a slow lap to prove she could keep her feet, and going back to her salt bag before the real trial began. That's what Cade wanted. That's what half the hold expected, gathered along the shore in their furs with their flasks, waiting to see the Icelander go down on the first turn so they could laugh about it through the winter. I should tell you about the long ice itself, because it matters to everything that came after. Frostreach Strait freezes solid only once a generation, when the current beneath it stills enough for the surface to hold, and when it does, the hold races it, a trial as old as the pack itself, meant to prove which of the young warriors had the nerve and the reading to survive open water under thin ice. It was not a sport for servants. It was not a sport, some of the elders would tell you, for anyone who hadn't trained a decade for the particular danger of it, the seams where the current ran wrong beneath the frost, the places where a wrong lean could put you through into black water that would take you under before anyone reached you. 12 racers stood at that morning's line. Cade Thorne, my best skater and no small vanity about it. 86 the others, sons and daughters of pack families who'd spent their whole lives training for exactly this trial, and one Icelander in a borrowed racing coat that didn't fit her shoulders, holding a dare she hadn't asked for. Elder Marin, who oversaw the trial from a bench near the Judge's Rise, hadn't even looked up from her ledger when Cade proposed adding Senna's name. If the Icelander wants to embarrass herself, that's her business, she'd said, already signing it through. Might liven up the morning. I remember the particular shame of that, not Senna's, whose face gave away nothing but my own, standing close enough to have stopped it and choosing instead to watch, curious despite myself what she would do. The bell rang, she skated. I want to tell you I knew immediately. I didn't. For the first 100 strides she was unremarkable, competent, low to the ice, saving her legs the way a woman does who has never had legs to spare. Cade and the front pack pulled away from her easily, the way water pulls away from a stone. My council, gathered behind me, had already turned back to talking about the grain levy, satisfied the morning's entertainment was concluded before it began. Then she took the first long turn, and something in my chest went quiet in a way it had never gone quiet before. It wasn't loud. That's the strange thing. Looking back, I'd always imagined a bond would announce itself, howl through me the way my wolf howled when a threat came near the pack. This didn't howl. It went still, the way a held breath goes still, the way the hold goes still in the last second before the ice cracks and everyone waits to hear which way it will go. I found myself gripping the rail of the judge's rise without remembering my hand moving there. She was gaining. Not on Cade, not yet, but on the middle pack, closing the gap stride by stride with a form that had nothing wasted in it. Elbows tucked, hips low, and I understood, watching her, that whatever she told herself about being a servant who scraped ice for a living, some part of her had been reading this straight every morning for years, learning where the true line ran under the frost, where the ice held and where it didn't. She wasn't following the racer's path. She was cutting her own, straighter, faster, along seams in the ice that I doubt anyone else on that straight could see. To understand what I was watching, you'd have to know what I didn't yet, that Senna Wren had come to Frostreach as a girl of 9, the last of a line the Hold's own records had marked extinct 3 generations back, brought in by a mother who never told anyone her family name and died before Senna was old enough to ask why. The girl had grown up in the servants' quarters behind the salt house, had learned to read ice not from any Hold master, but from a mother who used to take her out at dawn before anyone woke, pressing her small hand flat against the frost and teaching her, without ever once naming what she was teaching, to feel the current moving underneath. Senna had thought it was simply a game between them, a mother's fondness for the straight she'd chosen to raise a daughter beside. She had no idea, standing at that practice line that morning, that she was about to put 20 years of her mother's unexplained lessons to a use neither of them had ever imagined. "Your Grace," my steward at my elbow, uncertain why I hadn't moved or spoken in some time. I didn't answer him. I was already unlacing my own boots. There's a rule, unspoken but iron, that the alpha does not race his own trial, that the king watches, judges, crowns. I broke it that morning without deciding to. My wolf wanted the ice under me the way it wants ground under a threat, some old instinct insisting I needed to be close enough to catch her if the straight did what it sometimes does to newer skaters and opened without warning. I told myself that's what it was. I was already at the shore line. By the time I admitted to myself, it wasn't the ice I was afraid for her losing to. "You cannot race your own trial," my steward said, scandalized, trotting after me. "I'm not racing it," I said, which was a lie I told us both, and stepped onto the ice. The cold hit through my boots the way it always did, familiar, grounding, and for a moment I let myself simply skate, long, hard strokes along the outer edge of the course, the wind cutting past my ears, the Hold's noise falling away behind me until it was just the straight and the sound of blades on ice, and somewhere ahead of me through the spray, a woman in a borrowed coat closing on the middle pack with a form no one had ever taught her. I caught the escort line at the second bell, not racing, not yet, just close enough along the outer edge to keep pace, close enough to see the mark. It was on her wrist, where her glove had ridden up in the wind, a thin pattern under the skin, pale as frost on glass, and as I watched it began to glow, not the way I'd been told a bond mark glows in the old stories, gold and triumphant, but blue-white, like ice does when the sun hits it at the wrong angle and shows you the cracks running all the way down. It was the mark of the long-skate line. I knew it because my grandfather had shown me a drawing of it once. In a book of bloodlines the Hold had thought extinct for 3 generations. The only blood that could read the straight's true path the way water reads its own bed. I had read that page as a boy and thought it a fairy tale my grandfather told to keep me interested in old history. I had never imagined I would see the mark itself, alive on a living wrist, 20 feet ahead of me on ice that could kill us both if either of us misjudged it. I said her name. I don't think I meant to say it aloud. The wind took it and she didn't hear it, or if she did, she didn't break stride because Cade Thorne was 15 lengths ahead and closing on the third marker, and she had a race to win. I want to tell you what the middle of that race felt like, because it wasn't triumph, not yet. It was fear, clean and total. The particular fear of a man who has just understood what he stands to lose before he's even allowed himself to know he has anything to lose at all. I skated the escort line watching her read seams in the ice that I, who had raced this straight a dozen times in my own youth, could not see at all. Twice she cut sideways from the pack's established line for no reason any of us could follow, and twice, moments later, the ice groaned and shifted where she'd have been if she'd held the racer's path, a soft, ominous settling that made the crowd on the shore go silent even from that distance. She wasn't following the safe way. She was following the true way, and the difference, I understood with my chest still gone quiet and strange, was the difference between a woman who had learned to skate and a woman who had been born knowing how to listen to ice the rest of us only pretended to understand. By the fourth marker she'd caught the middle pack entirely and begun working past them, one by one, each pass so clean it barely seemed like effort, and I watched Cade Thorne glance back over his shoulder, once, twice, with an expression sliding from confidence into something closer to alarm. There is a stretch on the long ice, past the fourth marker, where the straight narrows and the current beneath runs fastest, where even the most careful racers slow their pace out of respect for what lies under the frost. Senna didn't slow. She leaned into it, and for one terrible held moment I thought I was about to watch her go through the ice in front of the whole hold, in front of me, and I found I had already begun skating harder to close the distance between us, wolf and man both screaming the same single thought. Not her, not now, not when I've only just found her. She didn't go through. She read the narrows the way her mother had taught her without either of them ever naming it, cutting a line so precise it looked, from the shore, like poetry, and came out the far side of the danger still upright, still driving, with the mark on her wrist now burning bright enough that even the crowd, 100 lengths back, had begun to point and murmur. The last turn on the long ice is the one that's killed racers before, a hard bend where the current under the straight runs against the ice and thins it, where you have to know exactly where to lean or the whole surface groans under you like something waking up. Cade took it wide, the safe way, the way every racer takes it. Senna took it tight, along a seam only she seemed to see, and the ice sang under her blades. That's the only way I can say it, a high clear note like a struck glass, rising as she went, and for one held breath the whole shore went silent to hear it. She crossed the line 4 strides ahead of him. The mark on her wrist was blazing bright enough that I saw it from 20 lengths back, and I skated the last of the distance without any thought at all for what my counsel would say, or what 300 years of Frostreach protocol demanded of a king at his own trial. I came off the ice at a dead stop beside her, chest heaving, and she turned to look at me with an expression that had nothing performed in it, startled, wary, already bracing for whatever a king wanted from a servant who'd embarrassed his best racer. "Do you know what that is?" I asked her, nodding at her wrist. She looked down at the mark like it was a stranger's hand attached to her own arm. "A birthmark," she said. "My mother had one like it." She never said what it meant. "It means," I said, and my voice was not steady, which had not happened to me in longer than I could remember, "that the ice already knew you before I did." I did not wait for the closing ceremony. I did not wait for my counsel, or for Elder Marin, who had signed the dare sheet allowing a servant onto a warrior's trial expecting nothing but a story to laugh about to compose herself. I knelt, there on the shore ice with the whole hold watching, in front of Cade Thorne who had wanted her humiliated, and had instead watched her outskate him in front of everyone he knew, and I took her marked wrist in both my hands. "I am not asking you to kneel to me," I said, low enough that it was only for her. "I am asking if I may kneel to what you are." The hold went silent the way it had gone silent for the note the ice sang under her blades. Cade Thorne, who had laughed loudest at the practice line, did not laugh now. He stood with his skates still on and said nothing at all, and it was the first time in the years I'd known him that I'd seen him at a loss for it. Elder Marin, who had waved the dare through with a bored hand, was the one who came forward slowest of anyone gathered, and bowed the lowest. Senna didn't say anything grand back to me. She's never been a woman for grand things. She looked down at where my hands held hers, and then at the mark still glowing faint under her skin, and she said, "I only came out to scrape the ice this morning." "I know," I told her. "Stay a while longer. I'd like to see what else the straight's been keeping from me." She laughed, a short, startled sound like she hadn't expected to, out there on the ice with her whole world rearranged under her, and something in my chest that had gone still an hour before finally, quietly, began to move again. What I haven't told you yet is what happened after, because the crossing of a finish line, however the ice sings for it, is not the same as a hold accepting a servant as its alpha's bondmate, and I would be lying if I told you the days that followed were as simple as that first knelt moment on the shore. My council met that same evening, and I sat through 2 hours of careful, circling arguments about precedent and bloodline, and what the hold's neighboring packs would make of a king binding himself to an Icelander rather than the daughter of some allied house they'd spent a decade angling toward. I let them speak. I have learned in the years I've worn this crown that arguments spoken aloud burn themselves out faster than arguments left to smolder unsaid, and I had no intention of arguing at all, because there was nothing left in me to argue with. The mark had shown itself. The ice had sung. Whatever the council decided about precedent, my wolf had already decided about her, and my wolf does not consult committees. It was Elder Marin, of all of them, who spoke last and settled it, the same Marin who'd signed the dare sheet without looking up from her ledger. "I have sat on this council 40 years, she said, "and read every bloodline record we hold twice over in that time, and I will tell you plainly, I did not believe the Longskate line was more than a story we told children to explain why the straight sometimes forgives a careless skater and sometimes doesn't. I was wrong. I signed that girl onto a trial meaning her humiliation, and instead I watched her read water none of the rest of us can read, on ice that has killed better trained warriors than Cade Thorne. I will not compound one error by arguing against what the straight itself has already decided." She looked at me steady, the closest thing to an apology I ever got from her. "Let the hold see what I saw." The council did not vote against me. I don't know that they would have dared after that. But councils are not holds, and holds are not single women in servants' quarters behind a salt house, and Senna herself was the harder persuasion by far. She came to find me 3 days after the race, not summoned, which surprised my steward more than it surprised me, and stood in the doorway of my hall with her chin up and her hands folded the way she must have learned to stand for elders her whole life, and told me, without any softening at all, that she didn't know how to be what everyone suddenly wanted her to be. "I scrape ice," she said. "I have scraped ice since I was 9 years old. I know how to keep a straight smooth and how to read a crack before it opens and how to make a coat last 4 winters past when it should have been thrown out. I don't know anything about being a king's mate or a hold's Luna or whatever it is your council has started calling me in the corridors when they think I can't hear them. Neither did I know how to be a king the morning my father died," I told her. "I learned it the same way you'll learn this, badly at first, and then less badly, and eventually well enough that no one remembers you were ever anything else." "That's not an answer." "No," I admitted. "It isn't. Here is one then. I am not asking you to become anything. I watched you read that straight better than warriors who trained for it a decade, and I have never in my life seen anyone do anything the way you did that race, like the ice was speaking to you and you were simply answering. Whatever this bond means to my council, or my bloodline records, or the neighboring holds who will have opinions about it whether I ask for them or not, it means one thing to me, plainly. I have never met anyone I wanted beside me the way I want you beside me, and I would rather have you exactly as you are, the woman who scrapes the ice at dawn and knows a straight's true line by feel, than any daughter of any allied house my council would have chosen for me instead. She was quiet a long moment, studying me the way she'd studied the ice at the practice line, that same unhurried, unimpressed weighing. I don't want the hold to make me into something I'm not, she said finally. I don't want to spend the rest of my life curtsying and pretending I don't still know how to hold a scraper. Then don't, I said. Keep the scraper, I mean that. Half the reason I want you is that you'll never once pretend to be something you're not for my council's comfort. That was the beginning of it, not the finish line, the real beginning, the slower one, built over the weeks that followed out of small things rather than grand ones. She kept coming out at dawn to tend the practice ice, mark or no mark, crown or no crown pending, and I took to walking down and joining her some mornings, the two of us working in a silence that suited us both better than any of the formal courtship my council would have preferred. I learned, in those weeks, what I hadn't let myself learn in the 2 winters I'd watched her from a careful distance, that she hummed under her breath when she worked and didn't know she did it, that she had a dry, understated humor she only let show once she trusted you not to be startled by it, that she still visited her mother's grave every solstice and left a small scraped square of clean ice beside the stone, though she'd never explained to me and I'd never asked why. Cade Thorne, to his credit, came to find her a week after the race, not to apologize with any grace, because grace was never his gift, but to ask, gruffly, if she'd teach him to read a seam the way she had. She said yes before I'd finished being surprised she would. That's who she is. She has never once, in all the years since, held the dare against him the way half the hold expected her to. The binding itself, when it came, was smaller than my council wanted, and exactly the size Senna wanted, which is the only reason I permitted it to be small at all. We held it on the shore of the long ice, at dawn, with no more ceremony than the hold's oldest rites actually required. No crown of state, no procession, just the 2 of us standing where the practice line had been, her hand in mine, the mark on her wrist matched now by one risen fresh on my own, pale and new, still finding its color the way frost finds its pattern on a cold morning. Elder Marin spoke the old words. The hold that had gathered, and gather they did, more of them than I expected, more than had come for the trial itself, stood quiet on the shore the way they'd stood quiet for the ice's singing note weeks before. "Do you take this Icelander?" Marin asked me, in the old formal cadence, knowing what the strait itself has already named her. "I took her the morning she crossed the line," I said, which was not the answer the rite called for, and which the hold, I was told after, still repeats to this day when they tell the story to their own children. Everything since has only been catching up to what I already knew. Senna didn't say anything grand either when it came her turn. She never has, and I've stopped expecting her to. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me on the shore ice that first morning, steady, unimpressed with kings, entirely herself, and said only, "I still have ice to scrape this morning, your grace. Try not to keep me long." I didn't. We finished the rite before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, and she went back out onto the strait with her salt bag before the hold had even finished its congratulations, and I went with her, because I have learned in the years since that the mornings I spend beside her on the ice, quiet, working, neither of us needing to fill the silence with anything more than the sound of blades and scrapers, are worth more to me than every crown I've ever worn. The hold still races the long ice every generation. They still salt it at dawn. But the Icelander's line doesn't scrape frost alone anymore, and no one at Frostreach dares a long skate onto the trial as a joke twice. Not because they fear the king's temper, but because they've all heard, by now, exactly what the ice does when it finally decides to sing.